Welcome live from Qt World Summit in Munich 2025. Okay, it's live in my timeline. You'll be watching it a bit later, but that doesn't matter. I met an old friend here at Qt World Summit. I think he must be 100 years old now, because at least he has been with the Qt company way before it was called the Qt company or Nokia or Qtopia or whatever else it was called. He is one of the very, very early trolls. So when did you start at the Qt company?
I started in 1996. So actually knew the founders from university. So I first downloaded Qt in 1995 and started playing around with it.
Right.
And then they hired me the year after.
1996. That must be like a few years after Qt was even started. I mean, we're here celebrating 30 years of Qt, and my calendar says 19. Well, no, it says 2025. So that's 29 years of being with Qt.
Yes. So I think our Git repository goes back to 1993. You might wonder how we did that, since Git wasn't invented then. But we used RCS, and then we just imported to different versioning systems. But the very oldest commit in the Qt source code tree is from 1993. So I think 1995 was the first public release of Qt.
So you were Trolltech number
4.
4.
So 2 founders, and then early rockstar programmer Arnt Gudbrandsen, and then it was me.
Arnt Gudbrandsen. I remember his name. He was the one who invented the build system tmake. And before you start going, this is not live, so you cannot correct me anyway. But before you start complaining, Jesper, it's called qmake. No. Qmake was much later. Tell me the story of tmake and qmake.
Tmake was actually created by Håvard Nord, one of the founders. You were confusing because Arnt Gudbrandsen invented Qdoc.
There we are.
Qdoc was also written in Perl back in the days.
Right.
And tmake was the build system for Qt, also written in Perl. And this, I think, a bit of the qmake syntax remaining still comes from Perl, because back then tmake files were executable Perl, so you could put arbitrary Perl in your build scripts.
Awesome. And for those of you sitting there at home saying, Perl, what is that? Well, never mind. That is history. And you're asking yourself, is this interview Jesper is doing here now, is that about the new 3D rendering, or is it about the Android? Or no, I am talking to Paul Olav here about the good old days. So stay tuned for more stories from back then. So Qt was released, the first public release when?
I mean, it must be 30 years ago.
Yeah.
0.90.
0.90.
It was a binary release for Linux only.
Yeah.
And then I downloaded one of the, not that version, one of the, maybe 0.92 or something like that. When I started working for Qt, we were around 0.96, which means I have code in all the 7 major versions of Qt.
Yeah, so just to clarify that, you are the oldest man, not by age, but the longest man standing nowadays. The 2 founders are gone, and Gudbrand is gone too. So you are by far the eldest troll around.
Absolutely. Oldest surviving troll is what I call myself. Of course, there aren't that many trolls around anymore, because we are called cuties these days.
Yeah. So I would like to understand the very early days of Qt. What the start of Qt? What was the first major milestone of the birth of Qt that you can think of?
The start of Qt was actually one of the founders, Håvard Nord, doing his master thesis at the university in Trondheim.
Yeah.
This is the signals and slots thing that is the fundamental invention behind Qt. And then obviously releasing Qt. It's actually a funny story. 090, before my time, they packaged it all up. And back then, FTP was the technology of the day. They uploaded it to incoming at .sunsite.edu. If you remember that, then you're a real old-timer.
Well, a lot of people will have to look up in the dictionary what does FTP stands for. But it's like what was www dot something in the very, very early days. So they uploaded to ftp.sunsite.edu.
Yeah. So, and then it was so late at night that I thought, we'll announce it tomorrow. And then they come back to work the day after, ready to send out the announcement email. And they say, there's an email from some guy in Australia saying, nice toolkit you guys made. But I noticed there was a class missing, so I wrote it for you. So that man's name was Warwick Allison. He was working on a graphical front end for the old school game NetHack. If you know the term roguelike, I mean, NetHack was the original roguelike. And that was the first killer app for Qt. This is what put Qt on the stage, on the world stage. This, I guess, Dwarf Fortress is probably the closest thing to NetHack these days.
Yeah, this is the early days of. I remember, was it Doom that was rewritten to Qt at some point just for the fun of it? So, or at least a demo around that.
And Doom has been rewritten to run on absolutely everything. I'm pretty sure there are toasters running Doom. So.
So KDE was also among the first to join, and one of the huge successes.
That is what really made Qt visible. So the first thing we noticed was we got this really strange bug report from a German called Matthias, who and Art would send a mail back saying, why do you care? The only way you'd see these problems would be if you wrote your own window manager. And Matthias wrote back, I am writing my own window manager. And soon after, Matthias Ettrich sent out the famous invite to contribute to the cool desktop environment, cool with a K. So that is the original abbreviation for KDE. So it's not what some people claim that KDE stands for, the Kalle Dahlheimer experience. But KDE insists that it has never been called KDE. And they're technically correct because they did change the name before they started the project. Wow. So the KDE project has never been called
the cool project. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I can firsthand tell you that Kalle, despite being one of the first people answering to Matthias Ettrich back then, he has claimed throughout his whole life that it has nothing to do with his name. Neither does KDAB stand for Kalle Dahlheimer AB. But you can look that up yourself if you don't know. Well, can you pronounce our name?
Klar Elvdalens Dataconsult.
There we are.
I mean, Norwegian and Swedish are very closely related languages.
Fair point. In the early days, we went to a Linux talk. I remember also in the very early or late 90s, so 1999 or something like that. And our marketing team was like Kalle and me, and a few other people, the whole company, and basically we wanted to figure out something that would be groundbreaking to put on our t-shirts. So after a long discussion, we kind of gave up, and I said, why don't we just put on there, try to pronounce our name? So we did. And far, far away from our booth, I met somebody that was going like, Klapatapatalen Starter Consults. So that's what KDAP stands for, yeah. But when KD joined, that was in late 90s or something like that. And you got a lot of heat because you put out Qt in a license that wasn't exactly to the liking of the free software world.
That is correct. I mean, I guess we can admit it now. The QPL was written to be difficult. I mean, sort of like the myth that the QWERTY keyboard is made to slow you down. But I mean, I don't know. We might have been 6 programmers back then. So if we had released Qt under the GPL, they could, some small student project could easily have outcompeted us and made a fork of Qt. And then they could have used all of our code, and we couldn't have used their code in the commercial version. So it was, we were stretching the open source definition to the maximum. So I don't remember all the details of the QPL anymore, but specifically that you were not allowed to release modified versions of the source code. You had to release patches. So that was purely made to make it impractical to make a fork.
Right. And I mean, not many 6 company big or 6 developer big companies got the rage of the likes of Richard Stallman back then and the whole Free Software Foundation. I mean, they must have thought that you were hundreds of thousands of developers or some such.
I mean, we were the big bad wolf for the free software community, but to be fair, we tried very hard to disguise how small we were.
Right. I think it's about time. I mean, Richard Stallman politely asked you to apologize for choosing QPL. And I don't think that apology ever came. So will you be the representative to say, no, we're not going to go there, I can see.
I mean,
okay, next question would be...
No. I mean, it is fair. I would say licensing is a very complex issue and the legalities are difficult, but it's very hard to say with a straight face that Richard Stallman didn't have a very good point. So I think the apology should really go to KDE for putting them in a hard position, because as far as I can see, Trolltech never broke the GPL. We didn't distribute KDE. So it was the KDE project who had the legal difficulties with them being GPL and Qt not being it.
And all of that is history by now. It's 25 years ago, 30 years ago, and Qt has served KDE very well. And KDE has served Qt very well, being the gigantic platform to show what can you do with Qt.
I do think we managed to make up with Richard Stallman by releasing it under the GPL.
Then came around Nokia. And those of you that have watched the QML intro series that I have been the kind face to will know that I in there quoted that somebody at Nokia looked at the license deal and came to the conclusion that it was 56 seconds of turnover for Nokia to buy all of Trolltech. I'm sure I made half of that up myself, but maybe you can tell a bit more of the story behind that deal that eventually meant to Nokia buying Trolltech.
I can't confirm anything about how many seconds of Nokia revenue, but I have some perspective from the Trolltech side. Obviously, most of this was extremely secret, but what I heard was there was a sales guy who was really, really good at his job selling Qt to Nokia, convincing them that this would be a brilliant foundation for the next software platform. And then Nokia are running the numbers, not comparing it to seconds of revenue, but comparing, okay, this is how much we'd have to pay in licensing. This is how much we could pay for the whole company. So they decided to buy the whole company instead for less money.
Mm. Somehow this reminds me when I go on holidays and my kid, I was about to say my wife, but of course not my wife. My kids forget something crucial. It's like, I will go like, you had one job, sell licenses, not the whole company, you.
I mean, it wasn't I mean, he didn't do a bad job. He just lost out on the commission of a lifetime. No, it was a personal loss.
Indeed. So I wonder what made Qt go down the path of phones back then. I mean, obviously Nokia, as I remember, they had lots of different toolkits inside and were looking for something to uniform. But why did they even think of Qt to start with?
Qt was on the roadmap because we had Qtopia, which is some of you might remember the green phone. We actually had our own phone. I mean, and obviously the phone hardware was made in China, but we put our own software on it, complete the whole stack.
And if I may just interrupt you there and get the camera on me, this is what the green phone looked like. Yeah, we bought one and you never shipped it to us because there was some problem, and then we never got that green phone. But
I had nothing to do with that. So I mean, I don't even think I can apologize for that.
That part you not apologize for. That's okay.
I have two green phones in my office now.
I remember those days when you guys went down and wanted to create your own phones. And I was doing a lot of trainings on Qt for the desktop back then. And at some point, I think it was Siemens or somebody like that, that bought a training on Qtopia. And somebody from Trolltech said, "Hey, Jesper, you can do that, right?" And that must have been the worst experience, both for me and for the customer ever, because they would ask a million different, very phone specific things. And at some point they got to, and then we got to discuss the dialing, and that was ATDT. I seem to remember that's how we were communicating on the modems to dial up back then. And fortunately, there was some. So I had this tiny little straw that I hang to, and they was like, "Yeah, details, carry on." Like, and then questions like, "Can we talk about signal slots instead, or Q object?" And that was something. So if any of you are around, I am terrible sorry for my performance back then. Hey, I can say sorry too. So yeah.
But Qtopia, funny you mentioning that because the way that came to be, I mean, this was never meant to be a product. I mean, you might wonder why would a toolkit company suddenly start making a phone or a phone operating system. So it's all started with Qt embedded, which we had a cross-platform solution for the desktop, and we realized, hey, we can easily scale this down. We don't need a Windows system because we do so much on our own anyway. So back then, the graphics world was a lot easier. I mean, there was something called the Linux frame buffer.
Right.
So you could just memory map the screen.
Right.
And you could just write to an address, and that would turn up as a pixel on the screen.
Drop some colors in there. Yeah.
So yeah, sure, we can just open a Cube Painter on the screen and draw window decorations and stuff. And then we thought, we need to sell this to show people the power of this. So we hacked up a demo of just a launcher and some windows running different applications and saying, okay, look, this is how easy it is to write something for an embedded device. You should write something like that and pay us royalties for Qt. What we didn't realize was that people would say not that, but, oh, that's nice launcher you got there. We want to buy that. And then you may remember the Zorus from Sharp.
I had a Sharp Soros myself.
You did?
Actually, that's a funny story, at least for me. I bought it in US. I was the only place you could buy it. So I was in US physically, and I went to a shop and wanted to swipe my credit card, but for some reason they couldn't take that huge transaction on my credit card. So I went to an ATM, and I don't know how much they costed, like 2,000 or some insane amount of money, but we needed those to do get some experience with that new thing. So I went to an ATM and I took out, I don't know, $4,000 in 100 bills, and I got this gigantic pile of money with me. And like, do I even dare walking around with that amount of money here? But well, I did survive.
I mean, that's not very hard to guess.
True. So let's go back and talk about Qtopia. That came out of Australia, didn't it?
It did. And you might wonder, how did Trolltech decide as an 80-person company, decide to have an office in Australia?
80 or 8?
That is my point. I mean, we were on a company trip to Italy, combined strategy meeting and vacation. And we rented a villa at the Amalfi Coast. And the main product of the Amalfi Coast is lemons. And they make this deadly concoction called limoncello, which is 40% alcohol and tastes like lemon drops. I mean,
that explains quite a few of the design in Qt these days. Carry on.
And especially the afternoon sessions were high-flying. So Warwick Ellison of NetHack fame had been working in Norway for a few years and decided he was tired of Norwegian winters and Norwegian beer prices and wanted to go home. I thought, hey, Australia sounds like a great place to live for a few years. So then we decided, we might have been around 10 people in the company at the time. Yeah, sure. We'll open an office in Australia. And this is where Qt Embedded got started.
Right. And later on, Qtopia.
And later Qtopia. And yeah, Qtopia started as just a demo to sell Qt. And unfortunately, we never actually got around to redesigning it. And, anyone who's done software projects know that you should never ship your demo. And yeah, so that was a milestone for the whole of the Qtopia project. But it was just hacks on top of the original demo.
Another thing you should never do either is to give names to things that when they are only temporary names. So we had QML, Qt Quick, Qt Declarative, whatever. We had Qtopia, Qtopia Core, QPE, all of these things that are, well, two sets of things that were work in progress. So
actually, this has probably never been told before, but this name Qtopia is different from all this.
Okay.
The name Qtopia came first.
Okay.
We actually, and I think we registered the domain. We've figured out this is a great product name. Now we just need to find a product for that name. So this is, I think this, I'm going to take a chance and say that this NDA has probably expired by now, but there was a Qt port to the PlayStation 2. And for a while, I mean, it never got anywhere. but we did actually have Qt up and running on the PlayStation 2. And for a while we thought maybe Qtopia could be a name for that product.
Talking about Australia and these days, that was the time for the QtScape hack too, if I remember correct, wasn't it?
That was before. That was actually before we went to Italy.
Okay.
Just actually days before going to Italy. So for those who don't remember the old days, Netscape, which was the precursor of Firefox, was Unix only X11 browser, the first real browser. And they decided, okay, we're going to open source. And they said, on this date, we're going to release the source code. So we thought, hey, that would be a brilliant showcase for Qt strength. Let's bring a bunch of people together. So we invited people from KDE.
My boss included.
Boss, Karl Dahlhammer, was absolutely one of them.
Yeah.
And I think also Lars Knoll, who later became maintainer and CTO.
Yeah.
And also is known as father of the modern web, since he worked on KHTML, which
Right.
all of the modern browsers are based on WebKit, which is a direct continuation of the code he wrote.
Mm-hmm.
But I digress. We had a bunch of brilliant people together, and in just a few days' time, I don't remember if it was 3 or 5 days, we had a complete port of, or at least a fully working web browser built on Qt. And since Qt was cross-platform, we could also then build it for Windows, and then we had the first Windows build of Netscape ever.
And that is a great opportunity for how many people were there like by now? 10 people company to really show to the world what they could do. So you put your marketing skills at work there, right?
Yeah. So any marketing people watching this might want to skip ahead a few seconds, because what we did was we went to Italy and
Drank 40% alcohol.
Yeah, I mean, we sent out an email about it. And a bunch of people must have gotten the message, because Aunt got the phone call from our internet provider saying, hey guys, did you know that you're using 70% of the outgoing bandwidth of the country of Norway?
All 20 bits at a day. I'd like to finish up on a good note here. Remember the good old days of Qt 3, and then came the even better days of Qt 4. I have an experience back then where I was doing a lot of trainings, and in my trainings, I would be greeted by a man with a very shiny pair of shoes and a suit that costed at least a month's worth of my salary. And he would say, can I please have a minute of your time, just when it's okay with you, meaning right now, obviously. And he said, well, before he continued on, I would tell me, absolutely. I just want to point out, I do not work for Trolltech. And you could see the air burst out of that balloon, because he just now, finally, somebody from Trolltech I can shout at for that tiny little auxiliary library for graphics. That is not our thing, but now we are spending half of our resource rewriting to the next version. Why did you do that to the world?
Yeah, in hindsight, it was maybe not the best idea to change everything at once, and I think we just thought, okay, it's a major release, we can change things now, we can make everything right at once.
Mm.
And I mean, a lot of good things were done, but maybe we didn't need to change all the APIs.
Right.
Sorry about that, guys.
And to whoever is have been watching any of our intro to either QML or Qt in both series, I am pointing to what's his name, Jasmine
Blanchett.
Blanchet's. Uh, I'm pointing to the document that he wrote, and which is now on the internet for this. And I remember the good old days of when you would write in Qt, you write a new Q slider 1, 10, 5, 5, Qt horizontal, this. And nobody would know what these numbers meant because there was a minimum and a maximum and a page step and a current value in there. And yes, that was in his honor, a very good idea to rewrite to that.
I mean, maybe we could have kept some of the old API around in addition.
Yeah. I think the thing that killed me the most was those tiny little semantic changes. It was like Q string list split. Taking a Q string was now put into Q string split, making sense. But what would you do if it was an empty element first? So if you are splitting /user /local /bin, then it started with slash. And if you start with that, do you get an empty element first or not? And that changed. That bit me quite a few times.
I can definitely understand the pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I would like to say thank you. I have been saying sorry, but I'd like to say thank you now because that move was very consultant friendly.
I'm not sure I will take either credit or blame for that decision.
But it was really KD that got most of the pain out of that, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'm sorry for the pain KD suffered there. I think from what I remember, it took them a very, very long time to get their momentum back.
Mm.
Start of KD4, I think, was very rocky.
Yeah. And well, at the same time, they wanted to migrate from Qt3 to Qt4 and also to just add a million different breaking features because they have been hanging on to the binary compatibility that Qt did. So
But to be fair, I think Matthias Ettrich was still active in KDE, and he was head of development for Qt. So he was sort of hurting himself in that process.
Right. And as I said earlier, Qt has served KDE very well over the years. As still a bit KDE developer, I certainly can appreciate that Qt was a fabulous toolkit for that.
And also, Qt has a lot of, we have a lot to thank KDE for as well, both for exposure in the world, for all the feedback we get from them, and just cooperation with KDE. That's yeah.
So in another installment, I will take you up on the discussion of XR and XR in the face of Qt, obviously, or with Qt, I guess. We could continue on for a very, very long time here, walking down memory lane. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I thought it would be fun to just get some of the insights from back then. I know that a lot of you out there had been using Qt, if not for 30 years, then at least for many, many years. It's a great toolkit. For me, it has been my whole career. I had 2 years before I started with Qt in KDAP. And even in those 2 years, I was doing KD development. So my whole career. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks for having me here. It's been great fun.